Good afternoon, and welcome to our inaugural Disability Chat Hour. Each month, HDSA and our resident disability expert, Allison Bartlett, will tackle some of the most vexing issues surrounding disability and HD. Each chat will be about 45 minutes, so we can leave plenty of time for questions. It's easy to ask a question. All questions will be answered after the presentation, but you can send a question at any time during Allison's presentation. Just click on the chat function in the toolbar, type your question, and hit send. Your questions cannot be seen by others, only by those of us at HDSA. This presentation will be available in about a week on HDSA's YouTube channel or by going to hdsa.org/disabilitychat. Future disability chats will include work credits and how to qualify for disability in October, followed by the 5-step evaluation, how Social Security evaluates a disability claim, and what evidence you need on November 21st. We hope you can join us for these presentations. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Allison. Allison Bartlett is HDSA's Manager of Disability Programs and is a disability attorney who specializes in representing clients with rare chronic conditions like HD to navigate them through the complex disability system. She's a passionate advocate for our families throughout the disability process and in the community, attending advocacy days on Capitol Hill, giving disability trainings at multiple HD education days and support groups. Allison holds a JD from the University of Cincinnati College of Law and a BA in International Affairs from James Madison University, and she is a member of the Virginia Bar. And now I'll turn our chat over to Allison.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. So this is our first disability chat session, and today what I'm going to be talking about are the public and private disability benefits and how those all work together. But before we even get into disability benefits, one of the #1 questions that gets asked is when to stop working. And ultimately, the decision to stop working is very difficult. It requires a lot of planning in advance. You shouldn't be at the point where you just up and have to stop working one day. It really should be a step-by-step process, and there's a number of things that you have to take into consideration. First, you don't want to lose any potential benefits by trying to continue to work and ultimately getting fired. You also need to make sure that you are seeing a doctor and get medical care, because if you're fired from your job but you haven't seen a doctor and you apply for disability, there's no evidence that your disability actually exists. So it's very important to get medical care throughout this process. You need to be open and honest with your family and medical providers about your work status and about the severity of your condition. And this is all important because within the HD community, applying for a disability is almost a necessity. Most families are going to have to apply for a disability. So ultimately, the decision to stop working is yours and yours alone, but you have to figure out what the right point is for you. A lot of times people ask if they have to report their condition to HR. You do not have to report your condition to HR. You can request accommodations if you're having difficulty at work. If they ask why you need accommodations, you can be vague. You can say something like you just have a neurological condition and you want to ask for accommodations. Under no circumstances do you have to disclose that you actually have Huntington's disease. And if an employer asks if you've had a genetic test, that's very questionable. You do ultimately have to work with your HR department if you want to get disability benefits through your employer, which we'll talk about more during this webinar. It is also important to recognize the difference between employer discrimination and not applying for benefits in time. If you tell an employer about your HD, you are not symptomatic, and you're performing your job well, but you are fired anyway, it might be discrimination. If you tell an employer about HD and you're given an ultimatum to take disability or get fired, it might be discrimination. If an employer does not know anything about your HD and you are let go for not keeping up with jobs tasks, it is not discrimination. Okay. So the next thing to think about is what actually is the definition of work. And the reason this matters is because work is not defined the same way throughout the disability process. Generally, when we think of work, we think of full-time employment or part-time employment, but it's more than that. It's also your ability to perform work-related activities, actually being able to physically attend your job and performing the job duties at the job. It's also how much you earn. For Social Security purposes, they look at substantial gainful activity. So that's how much you earn in a month. And that amount is $1,220 gross, so before taxes. And so the definition of work is an important distinction in the process because it will dictate what kind of benefits an employee is eligible to receive. Some benefits require you to stop working completely, while other benefits require you to work under a specific earning threshold. People often confuse the terms working and employed. The big distinction is you can be employed and apply for disability benefits. In most cases, you actually still have to be employed to be eligible for benefits through your employer. So once you've kind of determined where you are with your work status, if you really are ready to stop working, the next thing you need to look into is the different kinds of disability benefits, because there are short-term benefits and long-term benefits. So temporary benefits really are the kind of benefits if you intend to return to work or if someone intends to return to work. And that includes sick leave or vacation pay, FMLA, short-term disability, unpaid leave. And so temporary disability really is any disability that's going to last less than 6 months. It could be if you want to take time off because of a diagnosis, or it could be if you need to take time off to care for a sick family member. Permanent is when you do not intend to return to work, and that's a disability that's going to last more than 6 months. And that really just includes long-term disability and Social Security disability. Now that we've talked a little bit about disability itself, now we're going to talk about the different kinds of benefits that go along with the short and long-term disability. So with disability, there's private disability and public disability. So private disability is either through your employer or it's through an insurance company that you find on your own. Generally, private disability benefits are more expensive. Because they're at a greater cost to you. So it's like when you hear about Liberty Mutual or other insurance companies, and they provide short-term disability or long-term disability. There's also separate employer-funded disability programs, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that's essentially a retirement system created by one profession. And so if you work for a specific profession, you pay into that retirement instead of paying into Social Security like most everyone else. And then public benefits, those include unemployment, temporary state disability, Social Security disability insurance, and supplemental security income. Generally, these are provided by the federal, state, or local government, and these are usually at a much lower or no cost to you. Social Security disability insurance does come with some cost because it's paying into the Social Security retirement program, but ultimately, public benefits are much cheaper than private benefits. So first, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the different kinds of private benefits. So first is short-term disability. Short-term disability is insurance that replaces income for a short period of time. Generally, it covers close to 60% of income. This benefit usually lasts 3 to 6 months, and it's provided by employers or private insurers. Most of the time, you can get it through your employer. There is no such thing as government-funded short-term disability, so the only way you can get short-term disability is if you have your own private policy that you're paying for or you're getting it through your employer. And the reason it's important to talk about short-term disability in the context of HD, in the context of this conversation, is in most cases, you actually have to get short-term disability first before you can be eligible for long-term disability. So if you have both, if you're eligible for both programs through your employer and you're paying a small fee every month to get them, and you ultimately decide you can no longer work because of the symptoms of your HD, the first thing you have to do is you have to go into your HR department and you have to start the short-term disability paperwork process. Once that 3 to 6 months of your short-term disability has run, then you can transition to the long-term disability, which is generally permanent, and most of the time it covers the rest of your life. So the next thing we're going to look at is the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. So there's confusion around this. I've gotten asked a lot of questions in the past, but when you have FMLA, it's unpaid. You can take up to 12 weeks in a year, and it can be consistent weeks. Your health benefits are maintained, and your job is maintained. FMLA, or Family Medical Leave, is generally more for those who may intend to return to work, because essentially it's saving your job if you're able to go back. And so it doesn't actually include any kind of financial benefit. It's just beneficial because it does mean your health benefits are going to continue. And if you are going to take FMLA, you do have to submit proof to your employer that you have a serious health condition. The purpose of FMLA is so an employee can take leave to care for themselves or another family member and ensure their job is protected. So this does apply to caregivers as well. So if your spouse is the one that has Huntington's disease and you need to take time off to care for your spouse, you are allowed to do so under FMLA. It is important to note that not all employers or companies offer FMLA. The company has to have 50 people or more. And it's also okay that if you take FMLA and you decide you really cannot return to work, to then start the short-term disability process. So let's say you've gone out on short-term disability, you've gone to the doctor, you've kind of stepped back and you've thought about things and you've decided you really cannot continue to work anymore. Then that's when you decide to start the long-term disability process. So the purpose of long-term disability is to replace your income long-term. So it's supposed to be a permanent alternative if you can no longer work. It only starts after a waiting period, usually 90 days, which is why most people have to apply for short-term disability first. It fills that waiting period gap. And most long-term disability providers do require that the claim holder apply for Social Security disability. And the reason for that is because the long-term disability provider doesn't want to actually have to pay out the entire amount that you're eligible for. So in most cases, you will receive 60% of your salary. And so let's say 60% of your salary is $2,000 a month. So if you haven't applied for Social Security yet, the long-term provider will cover the entire $2,000 a month. Let's say then you move forward with Social Security disability and you get approved. You're approved for $1,500 a month. You won't get $1,500 plus $2,000. You'll still only get the $2,000, but instead of your long-term disability provider being responsible for the full $2,000, it's now only going to be responsible for $500. Long-term disability is definitely a necessity for HD families because it can help ensure that there's a long-term benefit moving forward. And while a lot of employers do offer long-term disability as well as short-term disability, in some circumstances, it might make more sense for families to just buy a private long-term policy separate from employment because it'll go with you from job to job. And also, if you decide to get it young, it's cheapest when you're young. Not all employers do offer long-term disability insurance. It's definitely something you need to ask. And it can be prohibitively expensive to convert an employer's long-term disability policy into a private policy. So let's say you're at a job now that offers long-term disability and you decide to move on to a new company because you want a new job. Well, let's say the new company no longer offers long-term disability insurance. So now you no longer have long-term disability insurance and you can't transfer your former employer's policy because it wasn't through you, it was through them. In that case, you could still look into finding long-term disability on your own, but that's the only way you'd be eligible for the benefit. So I definitely recommend that everyone talk to their employers and figure out what benefits they actually have and what they're eligible for, especially when they're starting to think about the disability process. You want to make sure you get all the benefits you're entitled to. And another thing to consider is most long-term disability providers, if you have a positive HD gene test, you will be prevented from getting insurance. So it is best to plan ahead and figure out what insurance you may need before getting tested. So outside of private long-term and short-term disability benefits, there's something called employer-funded retirement and disability. And what this is there are some jobs that pay into a separate private retirement and pension program instead of paying into Social Security. Some examples of these are the Florida Retirement System, the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, and the Louisiana School Employees Retirement System. Paying into separate pension programs is actually fairly common with teaching positions and state employment. So what this means is if you pay into a separate program, you will have to apply for disability and retirement through that program. You will not be eligible for Social Security. What makes it a little more confusing is generally you still pay into Medicare. So often, if you are in one of these private retirement funded and disability systems, you will have to apply for both disability through that system, through like the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, and you'll still also have to apply for Social Security to make sure you are Medicare eligible. Because generally speaking, none of the private disability programs that I just mentioned include health insurance. So most of the time you will have to find alternate health insurance if you have private disability. And this is just a kind of a little chart to show how the intersection of benefits work. So you have Social Security disability benefits on the left and private disability benefits on the right, and you see in the middle that they intersect, and oftentimes you will still have to apply to get Medicare to make sure you have health insurance benefits moving forward, which is really important because you need to continue to get medical care. So now that we've talked about private disability benefits, we are going to talk about public disability benefits that exist. And these include state, federal, and local benefits. So the first benefit that we are going to talk about is we are going to talk about unemployment. And this is important because this also comes up a lot when people are thinking about stopping work. So first, unemployment benefits are intended to provide temporary financial assistance. It's really for those who lose their job through no fault of their own, they're laid off, the company closes. There are circumstances that may disqualify someone from collecting unemployment, depending on state law. And generally, these benefits are based on the percentage of earnings over a recent 52-week period, so over the past year, and you're paid for a maximum of 26 weeks, so about 6 months. Every state administers their own unemployment program, so all state rules and regulations are different. There's no one mold for every state, so every state's a little bit different. And so if you wanted to apply for unemployment, you would have to work directly with your state. And a lot of times, people with HD keep trying to work, but are unable to hold a job because of their medical condition, and a lot of times, they will apply for unemployment. But this can create some issues. And the reason is, unemployment, the message that unemployment is sending is very different from the message disability is sending. So unemployment indicates that you are still able to work, but you have lost your job and you intend to find new employment. And unemployment benefits often include job search requirements. Disability, on the other hand, indicates that you are no longer able to work. And receiving unemployment benefits can can impact a disability claim. Generally speaking, if you are receiving unemployment benefits, it's not necessarily going to hurt a disability application at the initial application process. The only step that would really be an issue is if you end up having to appear before a judge. The judge may ask you about that at the hearing. But we understand that in a lot of instances, people need those benefits. They can't get through the month, they can't get through the rest of the year if they don't apply for unemployment. It's just good to be aware the consequences of what applying for unemployment is. But if you are receiving unemployment benefits and you apply for Social Security disability, your application will not be denied just because you're receiving unemployment benefits. The next kind of benefit is temporary state disability. Not very many states offer this program, but it is a very beneficial program in the states that do. So the only states that where this is available are California, Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. Some states offer assistance to low-income individuals in other ways, like the Temporary Disability Assistance Program in Maryland and paid leave programs in California, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. So how temporary state disability works is it's kind of like private short-term disability insurance. Eligibility for these programs, it depends on the length of work. Usually you will have had to have worked in the state anywhere from 1 to 6 months. It can be from illness or injury, it cannot be work-related, and benefits generally last 26 to 30 weeks, so about 6 months. California is the exception because California is always the exception, and California benefits last a year. Again, the weekly amount is about 60% of wages, and you do have to submit medical evidence showing that you are disabled. And then each state has their own specific additional state requirements. And it does not provide job protection. So if you end up taking temporary state disability, generally it means that you have lost your job and your job is in no way protected. And so for most people in this instance, the next step would be applying for Social Security disability. It is good to note that if you receive temporary state disability while applying for Social Security disability and you are found disabled, you will likely have to pay benefits back to the state, or you could risk losing your Social Security benefit entirely. So let's say you're located in the state of New York and you are getting temporary state disability. While you're getting temporary state disability, you apply for Social Security disability benefits and you're approved. Let's say there's a month left of your temporary state disability benefits. So you have 4 weeks left of your temporary state disability and you start getting Social Security disability at the same time. If you do not report to the temporary state disability agency that you are receiving Social Security and they don't stop your benefits, then you may have to pay back those 4 weeks where you get benefits from both of them. And I have worked with clients where there have been cases where they did not pay those benefits back and they lost everything. It is not worth the risk, so you do have to be very on top of all of the benefits that you are receiving and where you are in the process, because you don't want to have to pay anyone back and you don't want to risk losing the benefits that you are entitled to. So Social Security disability insurance, this is the main disability benefit that people think about when they're thinking about applying for disability and the disability process. And Social Security disability is a federal benefit program, and it's designed to provide long-term financial and medical insurance assistance. So essentially, Social Security disability insurance was designed to provide income for those people who can no longer work. This program is a work-based credit program, meaning employees pay into the system and Social Security looks at your work history. Your work history is the only thing they look at to determine eligibility for this program. You have to be between 18 and 66 years old. If you have reached full retirement age, you are no longer eligible for disability, even if you haven't taken retirement. At that point, you just have to apply for retirement. Social Security retirement and Social Security disability insurance, the disability program, they are the same program. If you are on it long enough, Social Security disability will just switch to Social Security retirement once you reach retirement age. So the number of work credits you need to be eligible for this program depends on your age. So once you reach the age of 40, you have to have 40 credits. And that's the same for the retirement program. Anyone between 18 and 39 have different credit requirements based on their age. And Social Security has a chart on the internet if you're interested. Your benefit amount that you're going to receive also depends on how much you paid into the system. And the amount is different for everyone. Only you can find out that amount. And as a weird rule within Social Security, you actually have to find out your award amount before you apply, because once you apply, that information disappears from the system. And you can find out how much you're eligible to receive one of two ways. You can either call your local Social Security office, or you can create a mysocialsecurity.gov account. And the mysocialsecurity.gov account is really helpful because one, it can tell you if you're eligible for disability, and it will tell you how much you're eligible to receive. The national average is about $1,200 a month, but you can receive up to $2,861 per month and as little as like $200 a month. It depends on how many work credits you have and how much you paid into the system. It is very important to note that your credits expire once you stop working. And this is important because there are a lot of HD families, there are a lot of individuals with Huntington's disease who stop working. They don't think that much about what's going on, or they don't seek medical care, and they wait 5, 7, 10 years to finally apply for disability, and a lot of times it's too late. If you don't apply for Social Security disability insurance in a timely fashion, you will lose the ability to get that benefit. Generally, you have 5 years until your credits expire. So let's say you've had a consistent work history, you've worked every year for the last 20 years. What that means is if you have to stop working this year, you should have until 2024 to apply for disability benefits, which is a lot of time. If you have a much more sporadic work history, which is also fairly common in the HD community, your credits may expire sooner. You can earn up to 4 credits a year. You don't have to make that much money to earn all of your credits. You only have to earn about $5,600 a year. And you can earn all of that money in 1 month, and you will have earned all of your credits for the year. But let's say you can only find very part-time work, and you've only been able to keep a job for maybe 3 months at a time. And so instead of earning instead of earning $5,600, you only earn $3,000 for the year. In that case, and you're likely only going to earn 2 credits for that year, so you won't earn all the credits. And if you are only earning 2 credits a year for 5 years, it means your work credit history is not going to go very far into the future if you eventually stop working. So it's good to kind of stay on top of that and be aware of that information. And again, that's why my socialsecurity.gov account can be really beneficial, because it'll let you know if you're eligible for disability before you even start the process. Once you are ready to start the disability application process, the application generally can take anywhere from 6 months to 36 months, depending on how many stages of appeal you have to go through. At the initial application stage, it generally takes 6 months to get a decision. If you are denied, you have 60 days to submit an appeal. At reconsideration, the first stage of appeal, it usually takes about 4 months to get a decision. And then if you have to go before a disability judge, you have to go to an administrative law judge hearing, it can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months to get a decision. It is important to note and to be aware that Huntington's disease qualifies for compassionate allowance. Which that means is your claim should be expedited through the system. Compassionate allowance claims should always go first. They always are moved to the top of the list. They're supposed to be looked at more often. They're supposed to be worked on first, and they take priority over everyone else. It's also important to recognize that HD is not the only compassionate allowance condition, so it does get grouped in with other compassionate allowance conditions. Your case should still get looked at first, and it should still get looked at more often. And so if your claim has been sitting at the initial application level and it's been 8 months, you definitely need to call and follow up. So if you're approved for Social Security disability insurance, cases are reviewed every 1 to 7 years. So your disability case will be reviewed, and depending on your age, it may be reviewed multiple times in your lifetime. It is important to know that Social Security assigns different review periods depending on the severity of the case and the likelihood of improvement. HD cases are generally only reviewed every 5 to 7 years because improvement is not likely. The review process is nowhere near as strict or paperwork intensive as others because improvement is not likely. And like I said previously, once you reach full retirement age, your Social Disability insurance does switch to retirement. And currently, if your birthday is on or after 1960, full retirement age is 67 years old. And just to refresh, if you are approved for Social Security disability insurance, you will also receive Medicare, the health insurance benefit. There is a 24-month waiting period, but it is important to know if you are approved for Social Security disability insurance, you will receive Medicare. So it makes up for if you have private long-term disability insurance, if you get Medicare through your Social Security disability insurance, you don't have to have private insurance. And even though you get Medicare as part of the Social Security disability insurance program, you do not have to take it. If you are on a spouse's plan, that is much better, and as long as it meets the relevant criteria, you can stay on that plan and you don't have to switch to Medicare. Medicare insurance is a choice, but you do have to meet specific criteria to waive your Medicare. Otherwise, it's one of the positive benefits of getting Social Security disability insurance. So the image on the screen, this really just shows the intersection of benefits and how Social Security disability insurance works with all of the other disability benefits that we've talked about. You can receive any combination of these benefits while you're applying for Social Security disability insurance. And really the point of this is to sum up, do not wait to apply for Social Security disability insurance because you do not have to. A lot of people make the mistake of waiting to apply for Social Security benefits, and it means that they've used up all of the other benefits they have first, and you don't want to do that because you don't have to. Unfortunately, the Social Security disability insurance process can take a long time. We ultimately don't want it to take a long time, but it can. And so we want to make sure that you have as many financial resources as possible, and you have as much benefits in place to protect you while you're going through this process. Because it's much better to know you have a safety net of 6 months of short-term disability, or you have a safety net of benefits while you're applying for Social Security disability insurance. Because if it takes a year to get your Social Security disability insurance, then you're only going 6 months without benefits. But if you have waited until you've used all the other benefits first and then apply for Social Security, then you're going an entire year without benefits instead of 6 months. Now I'm going to talk to you about supplemental security income. And the reason I'm talking about this separately is because this is a financial need-based program. So this is a federal benefit program designed to provide long-term financial and medical insurance assistance. So the purpose of this program is the same as Social Security disability insurance, but the requirements are very different. So this program is intended for those with very limited financial resources and a very limited work history. So that means this is for people who don't meet the age or work credit requirements. So they haven't worked enough or they've waited too long to apply for disability. And these financial requirements mean individuals cannot have more than $2,000 a month in resources, or they can't have $2,000 in resources total. Resources includes a checking account, a savings account, a retirement account, if you have a second car, if you own more than one home. So it includes a lot of things. And for couples, they cannot have more than $3,000 in resources. And this really creates a burden on families because it often requires divorce to meet eligibility criteria. $3,000 in resources is really not very many. And so this program was really designed to help those who have nothing or almost nothing. This benefit program does not offer as much financial assistance. The maximum benefit possible is $771 a month. And to stress, that's the maximum benefit possible. That does not guarantee you will get that. This amount is impacted by in-kind support, living situation, things like that. So in-kind support is if you get a lot of assistance from a family member. They're paying your rent, they pay for all your food, they pay for things. Or if you live with a family member and you don't pay rent. If you do not pay rent, Social Security will automatically deduct a third from the maximum from the maximum SSI benefit. So instead of receiving $771 per month, you would receive $514 per month. So that's something important to take into consideration. And a lot of people do receive less than the maximum benefit. Another thing to note is that with the Supplemental Security Income Program, you are usually automatically enrolled in Medicaid. And so Medicaid is a state assistance program. It's changed a little bit over the years as more states have expanded their Medicaid program. So a number of states now, more than half the states, if you're approved for supplemental security income, you'll automatically be enrolled in Medicaid if you're not already receiving it. In about 15 states, if you're approved for Social Security or supplemental security income, you will be automatically approved for Medicaid, but you will still have to submit a separate Medicaid application. And then there are about 10 states, including Connecticut, Ohio, and Virginia, where they have completely separate criteria, and so you will still have to submit 2 separate applications. Medicaid is not, it's not an automatic thing if you're approved for SSI. And something else to know is that Medicaid does cover long-term care. So if you have to go into a long-term care facility, or an assisted living facility, a nursing home, Medicaid can help pay for that. If you go into a Medicaid facility, Medicaid will cover the cost, but it also means that you essentially won't get any more supplemental security income. You might get like $10 a month. The supplemental security income application works a lot like it's exactly the same process as Social Security disability insurance. The only difference is the eligibility criteria. Again, the application process can take anywhere from 6 to 36 months. This is also compassionate allowance is also relevant for a supplemental security income case. And after approval, disability is reviewed every 1 to 7 years. Again, with HD cases, it's reviewed every 5 to 7 years. The really important thing to remember with this is people have to continue to follow the strict financial requirements. Social Security checks financial status and will take away benefits if you go over the financial limits. It is your responsibility to notify Social Security if there are any changes in financial status from month to month. If Social Security discovers that they have been paying you too much because you no longer meet the resource limit, they will stop your benefits and you might have to repay them thousands of dollars. I have had clients in the past who didn't consistently update Social Security with earning amounts because they did go back to work or they worked really part-time. And so when Social Security finally reviewed their case, they saw that the person had violated their income limits 2 years ago. And so what that means for Social Security purposes, and instead of stopping the benefits like this year, if the case is reviewed this year, they stopped the benefits 2 years ago, and then you have to pay Social Security back for everything you were paid for the last 2 years. And you don't ever want to be in that circumstance. Social Security, so if it takes, let's say it takes on the longer side to get approved for disability, it takes more closer to the 36 months. You do get back pay from the date that Social Security finds you disabled to the date that it is now. So let's say you're finally approved for disability today, September 19th, 2019, and Social Security finds that you were disabled the date you submitted your application, January 1st, 2018. You will get benefits all the way back to 2018, so you'll get almost 2 years of benefits. Social Security will count that back pay as a resource after 9 months. So it's really important to know that. So let's say you're given $20,000 because that's what Social Security owes you. If you do not use that money within 9 months, it will be counted against you. So if you have, like the resources from the last page, if you have more than $2,000 in resources as an individual, then you're no longer eligible. So one thing to always be thinking of is something that can be set up is a special needs trust. And I'll talk about that in later webinars, but a special needs trust is designed for people with disabilities to protect assets so they can get government benefits, but also have additional funding to make sure they can maintain an adequate style of life and have the resources that they need. And then overpayments is just having to pay Social Security back, which is scary, and I don't want anyone to ever have to do that. Okay, and so again, this is just kind of an infographic to sum up everything I've talked about today, how the public and the private benefits work together. So you can see that short-term and long-term disability touches Social Security disability insurance, and that's because you can apply for all of those benefits at the same time. All of those things can work together. And then the supplemental security income circle is off on its own because while technically in very limited circumstances, some people are both eligible for SSDI and SSI, you still have to meet those very strict financial requirements. So most of the time, if you have any of the private disability insurance policies, you're not going to be eligible for SSI because you will likely have too much in resources. Okay. So that sums up nicely everything we talked about today. And now, does anyone have any questions?
Okay. Hi, Allison. We do actually have some questions for you. One of them is, you mentioned getting unemployment while applying for SSDI. What about SSI, given it is income asset-based disability program?
So that one's a little harder to answer. That's hard to give a definitive answer on that one, because the way Social Security, so in addition to looking at the total resources they have, they also look at your monthly income. And if you're not the only person in your household, they look at everyone else in your household when they're looking at SSI. So you could be just getting the unemployment income, but if you're married and your spouse is making $2,000 a month and you have no kids, that's one set of criteria versus you're getting unemployment, your spouse makes $2,000 a month, and you have 3 kids. And Social Security doesn't release that information, so it's really hard to give an upfront answer. But it definitely complicates the situation if you're receiving unemployment and you're only applying for SSI. Will that completely disqualify you from benefits? No, but it also ultimately depends how much you're receiving in unemployment benefits. If you weren't making a lot of money to begin with, let's say you're making $1,000 a month, 60% of that is $600 a month. And if you have no other resources and all you're getting is unemployment, then it shouldn't disqualify you from supplemental security income. And like I said earlier, unemployment's it's just a temporary benefit. At most, it lasts 6 months. So if you start the SSI application process at the end of that 6-month period, then it isn't really going to be relevant anymore. So it's not really going to prevent you from applying for those benefits. And if for any reason you get denied because you're on unemployment, once the unemployment stops, you can just apply again.
Okay. Yeah. Great. We actually have a lot of questions here. So our next one is, if your SSDI benefit is low, like $200, wouldn't you get SSI instead if your resources are also low enough for SSI? And how would Medicare factor in since you are SSDI eligible?
That is an excellent question. And actually, if you have a low SSDI amount, you can also get SSI in addition. So at that point, you could actually reach the full $771 amount, but it would just be broken up differently. So you would get the $200 in SSDI, and then you would get $571 in SSI to make up the difference. And the healthcare question tied into that is really important because in a lot of states, I think in most states now, there are actually special Medicaid programs that help you cover the cost of your Medicaid premium. So if you're approved for disability and you get Medicaid, or excuse me, Medicare, you do have to pay the premium, and that is currently $134 a month. But if you have low resources, like if you're this person and you're only getting $200 from your SSDI, you should not have to pay that premium because that takes away your full benefit essentially. And so most states have these programs called like QMB. I can't remember the actual names. I just remember the acronyms. So I apologize for that. Health insurance is not my specialty, but I know there's QMB, which is like Qualified Medicare Benefit. There's like LIS. And those programs are designed to help cover the cost of your Medicare premiums and other insurance. So the eligibility for these programs are based on how much you're getting in disability benefits. Someone who's only getting $200 in disability benefits is going to qualify for all the extra assistance. They won't have to pay for their premium. They won't have to pay for their copays. They can also have Medicaid in addition to Medicare. So they will be 100% covered. And they'll also get SSI. Yeah.
Okay, great. Our next question is, so who do you call if you've been waiting 6 months to hear about your application? Do you call your local Social Security office or who?
First, this is my platform. Never call the national number. The national number is not super helpful, and you're going to have to wait on hold for forever. Everyone has a local Social Security field office, and I don't know the website off the top of my head, the exact link, but there's essentially a Social Security field office locator. You put in your zip code, and it will give you the field office number to your local field office. You're going to need to call them anyway, because depending on your zip code, every person is assigned a specific field office. Only your field office can actually answer all of the questions about your case. So I am located in Williamsburg, Virginia. My Social Security field office is in Newport News. And let's say I apply for disability. If I try to call the Richmond office instead, they're not actually going to be able to answer my questions because the Richmond office doesn't have my claim. Only the Newport News office does. And so that's how it works for everyone else. So if you've been waiting and you haven't heard anything, the first place to start is definitely call your local field office because they can tell you where your case is sitting. Your case will either be at the field office or it will be sitting with Disability Determination Services. If you call your local field office and they say your case is still pending with Disability Determination Services, ask for that number. They may or may not give it to you. Generally, while your claim is pending, you will get a letter from Disability Determination Services that has contact information on it. And so you want to call them, and you can call and ask. Generally, I always recommend asking a specific question, then ask your where's my case question. So a good question to always ask if you want to call DDS is, have you received medical records from this doctor? Then they answer, and then you ask, what is my case status? In my experience, they're more willing to help if you ask them a very specific question first and then kind of follow up to get case status. But the first place to start is call your field office. If they say your case is still with DDS, try to get the phone number to DDS and call DDS. That doesn't always work. Social Security, they're very secretive with their information sometimes, and a lot of times DDS doesn't like talking to people. And DDS doesn't update the field office, and so half the time when your claim is pending, the field office doesn't actually have that much information to give you. But the best place to start is calling your field office, and then if you get someone helpful, you can ask for the DDS number and say like, well, I just want to make sure they have records from Dr. So-and-so, and I want to make sure that they're doing the right things with the claim, and that can be more helpful. Like if you have a specific, like if you give them specific instructions, generally they're more willing to help.
Okay, great. Our next question. If a client is initially granted SSI and then after 6 months goes on SSDI only, is there a waiver of back payments not counting as resources for longer than 9 months?
So okay, so sorry, there's a lot going on in that question. So generally speaking, if you get SSI, you're approved, you're technically approved for SSI and SSDI, but you only get SSI in the waiting period. So one thing I didn't mention is when you apply for Social Security disability insurance, there's always a 5-month waiting period. I don't actually know why. Still to this day, I'm trying to figure that out. I still haven't figured out why. But once you're approved, there's a 5-month waiting period until your benefits start. In some circumstances, people apply for both SSI and SSDI, and they get SSI in that 5-month waiting period. And then when their SSDI starts, it's more than $771 a month. So if you're approved for both and your SSDI benefit is $800 or more, once your SSDI benefit starts, you'll no longer be eligible for SSI. And so the back payment won't matter because you won't have to meet those financial criteria anymore because you're no longer eligible. If you have benefits and it transfers from SSI to SSDI, it's because your SSDI benefit amount disqualifies you from SSI. And so the 9-month waiting period, having to worry about the 9 months of having to worry about back pay becoming a resource after 9 months actually isn't relevant anymore at that point.
Okay. You mentioned that HD qualifies for compassionate allowance. Does this happen automatically when you apply for Social Security disability insurance, or do you have to submit a separate application?
It should happen automatically when you apply, but often that is not the case. So first, if you're submitting an application, depending on if you go in person or online, if you submit the application online, you need to make sure you call Huntington's disease as adult onset Huntington's disease. For some reason, the way Social Security categorizes it, if you look at the alphabetical list of compassionate allowance, Huntington's disease falls under A. They consider it adult onset Huntington's disease. The application should be triggered just by using the words Huntington's disease or Huntington's chorea, but that's not always the case, so it's always best to put adult onset Huntington's disease. There's actually a resource on the HDSA website under disability resources that specifically talks about compassionate allowance and what terms to use. That compassionate allowance resource is actually taken directly from Social Security. It's taken directly from their manual. So Social Security is governed by something called POMS. The POMS is at the top of this resource. It's also good to put that in your disability application if you submit it online, because it's like, hey, Social Security, this is your exact rule, and this is where your rule is. Do what I say. If you go in person, I recommend actually physically bringing this resource with you, because one thing to think about and remember is when you're submitting a disability application, Huntington's disease is a very rare condition. Assume that most people, if anyone at Social Security, actually knows what it is. Most of the time, they're looking at cases like chronic pain, back pain, migraines, heart conditions. They see things that are very different from Huntington's disease. So really, you want to make sure you give them as much information as possible. So yes, it should happen automatically. Is that normally the case? Unfortunately, no. So another way to make sure it gets flagged is once you submit an application, is to call your local field office and follow up and say, hey, I submitted this disability application online on this date, or I came into the office on this date. I want to make sure you flagged my case for compassionate allowance. Have you done that? Yes or no? No, well, I need you to do that. No, you're going to fight with me, then I'm going to speak to your supervisor. Just always be ready to whip out, I need to speak to a supervisor when talking to Social Security. And part of the reason for doing that is supervisors are often the ones who have been there the longest and know the most about the rules. There's a huge difference when you get to talk to someone who's been working at Social Security for 20 years versus someone who's worked there for 2.
Okay. Our next question. Can a person get Medicare if they haven't worked in the last 10 years?
that's a really good question. I'm not actually sure of the answer to that, because I know those criteria work a little bit differently too, because like what I do know is when you pay into a private program, like if you live in Ohio and you're a teacher, you pay into OPERS for the retirement purposes, but you do also pay into Medicare. And so it's something you have to call and check, because they treat Medicare eligibility a little bit differently. And so in some cases, someone may not necessarily be eligible for the financial part of Social Security disability insurance, but they may be eligible for Medicare. I don't know about the 10 years, but it's definitely worth calling Social Security and asking.
And now for our last question, what happens if I get fired before I have a chance to apply for benefits through my employer?
So if you get fired before you have a chance to apply for benefits, most of the time that means you've completely lost access to those benefits. I think it also ultimately does depend on the circumstances for your firing. If you were fired because you could no longer keep up with your job tasks, you hadn't said anything to your employer about your condition, so from their perspective, you just couldn't do your job anymore, then you've lost access to those benefits. But if it definitely looks kind of like employment discrimination, that's a different issue, and you would definitely need to talk to an attorney at that point. Do I know if you could ultimately get access to those benefits back? I'm not sure. Employment law is not my specialty, but that's why it's always to kind of be on top of these things, and that's why it's good to talk to your doctors and your friends and your family, because going through this process, no one should ever go through this process alone. And I know the way we view things in our society, we don't want to be a burden, we don't want to ask for help. It's always good to ask for help, because sometimes, especially when you're living with a condition like this every day, that is your new normal, so you can't see things. And you want to make sure you've done everything to stay on top of it to get the benefits that you're entitled to. I, especially as a disability attorney, want everyone to get all of the benefits that they are entitled to. So it's good to start thinking about these things early. It's good to ask questions, and it's good to be prepared.
Okay. Well, thank you, Allison. We are now out of time. I do want to remind folks that this presentation will be available in about a week on HDSA's YouTube channel, or you can access it by going to hdsa.org/disabilitychat. Thank you so much. We hope you join us again in October, when we'll be talking about work credits and how to qualify for disability. Until then, have a good day.